one morning I woke up and my backpack, which was on the floor, was just floating around in brown, dirty water. I've never seen rain like this.
Lakshmi Jain was a doctor working with Médecins Sans Frontières in a remote tented hospital in South Sudan.
We went outside the camp and the entire place was just underwater. It was absolutely like the worst situation. The water was coming up to your kind of armpits, I would say.
Miraculously, the hospital was able to keep operating and the patients kept coming.
You realise that the patients were coming from so far that actually sometimes by the time they got to you, there wasn't a lot to do. There was a boy who had a snake bite. It was really bad timing for him because we just couldn't land the plane to get him out.
This is the part of medicine that most of us never get to see.
Doing that in that environment, you have to be very pragmatic and just say, this is what we can do.
Hey folks, welcome to No Ordinary Monday. Happy New Year. Hope 2026 is treating you well so far. And we are delighted to be back after our short break over the holiday season. If you are new to the show, welcome. And if you've been listening for a while, welcome back. I'm Chris Barron. I am a documentary filmmaker. Each week on the show, I ask a guest to tell me about the most extraordinary experience they've ever had on the job. We start with the path that led them there. We find out what the job's really like behind the scenes, and then we reveal the most important lessons they've learned along the way. All right, quick announcements before we get into the show. We have been working really hard behind the scenes to bring you guys some really exciting guests in the first part of this year. Everything from bush pilots to TV adventurers, death doulas, even roller coaster designers. And if there's a career or maybe a guest that you'd love to have featured on the show, you can drop me an email. I'm at hello, HELLO, at noordinarymonday.com. Love to hear from you. Let me know what you think. Also, we are working on some bonus content for this year. As we speak, we are trying to set up a Patreon. But in the meantime, if you'd like to support the show and help us keep the lights on, you can head to buymeacoffee.com/noordinarymonday. Any kind of support, even if it's just dropping us a message to say you love the show, it absolutely is incredibly appreciated. So we'd love to hear from you. All right, so on to today's episode. Today's guest is Lakshmi Jain. She is a doctor who has spent years working some of the most challenging medical environments on Earth. The organization she works for is called MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières, or Doctors Without Borders. Lakshmi's work has taken her from modern Western hospitals to remote field clinics, often places affected by conflict, disease, and natural disaster. In this episode, she takes us inside one of those experiences. When severe flooding cut off a hospital she was working in South Sudan, patients were still arriving and the limits of medicine became impossible to ignore. Stick around and see what it really takes to do her job. You're listening to No Ordinary Monday. Let's get into the show. Lakshmi, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm really well, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to chat.
No worries. We were talking before the call and you said this is your first podcast. Is that right?
Indeed.
I'm surprised. You have a fascinating job, and it might just be because podcasts are kind of a new phenomenon. And but yeah, you talk in front of people all the time, so I'm just surprised.
I think that's what I was thinking when I said to you I was a little bit like, not sure what to expect, because I do talk in front of people all the time, but I'm usually putting other people forward for podcasts, so it's quite nice to get the opportunity.
Lovely. So tell us, which part of the world are you in at the moment?
So I'm sat in a slightly sunny Yorkshire, in north of England. I work based out of London at the MSF UK office.
Lovely. And I guess this is a slightly different departure, a slight departure from what you may have been doing in a previous role you might be doing with the organization Médecins Sans Frontières. How do you find life now? Do you miss being out in the field? What's it like?
So it's super different. I kind of have to check in every day and be like, well, where am I and what am I doing? But I think the reassuring thing is that I really love it. I still work for Médecins Sans Frontières, and I think moving out of the role where I was traveling a lot was something I wasn't quite sure about. I now work as a medical content advisor. The ins and outs of that really is kind of looking at what's on the agenda at the moment. Things like organising conferences within MSF. We do an exciting scientific day, supporting other teams with their research and how to get it out. Dissemination is a real sexy word at the moment. Everyone's quite excited about how you don't just do work and research, but how you get other people to know about it.
Yeah.
And then I'm still linked to some of the projects I was working with for a long time the official title was a HIV and tuberculosis program implementer. So I went and supported with programs all over the world. And that's what you're alluding to. There was a lot more exciting travel then. But since the arrival of a small person in my life, yeah, I'm happy to be a little more grounded.
Yeah, it's not so convenient being in some of the places you've been with a little person running around, I imagine. But
There's
yeah,
all sorts of
it's
health and
probably
safety
nice.
restrictions. It's very irritating.
Lovely. So you've kind of taken a new role in, I guess, it's such a, because I do a lot of science documentaries, and it's exactly what we do as scientists. It's essentially, these guys are doing polar research or neuroscience stuff, and they're all beavering away doing their amazing stuff. But like, what's the point if no one is able to sort of understand what you're doing, appreciate what you're doing? So it's the same thing with MSF. You guys are doing incredible work, but half the battle is sort of telling people about it, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. This really does. I'm quite excited about this new role. It's still evolving as we speak, but it is a bit of the kind of journalism side to the medical
Oh,
world.
nice.
And interestingly, I can talk
Yeah.
about the very early days when before I became a doctor, journalism was quite high on the list of things I would have loved to have done.
Ah,
And
interesting.
now I'm kind of like, yes, there's a lot of things I used to get very angry about, thinking we need more advocacy, we need more people to know about this rather than just plodding on and treating patients, which is super important too. I'd never undermine that. But it's quite nice being on this other side where I do know a lot about the medicines and the management, but also think actually doctors probably need to shout a bit louder. I say that very interestingly at the time of a doctor strike. So there are some doctors shouting loudly, but
They are shouting, yeah.
in the MSF world, I think it is quite nice. And that's the beauty of MSF, that there are lots of doctors saying things have to change. And now through the written word, I can try and support teams a bit more to get that across. So yeah, it's interesting.
Nice. So it's come full circle. That's amazing. So I guess where I'd love to start is lots of people become doctors for different reasons. I guess the cliched one is, oh, I like helping people, all this kind of stuff. But you became a doctor in a different kind of way. Not a different, I mean, obviously you are a doctor, but you went to, from a very early stage, you went to far flung places. And I guess what drove you to do that in that sort of, in that way?
So after we chatted, I did kind of reflect on this a bit because it wasn't my only motivation, but I do honestly think the opportunity to travel was a motivator. It might not be one of those reasons you should say in an interview or,
Yeah.
is the most worthy, but I do think it was one of those. But it came from a place that I think was quite, let's go, I think I was quite an irritating child and teenager, if I'm honest. I had a real sense of justice. My parents took me to India every year, and I think that's when I started to think this is a bit rubbish. The world isn't balanced. It's very dictated. Your future is often dictated by where you are born. There's a lot of unfairness. How am I gonna play my part in trying to work within all of these inequities? And I used to just get very angry. I loved India, and that was one of the reasons I had a real passion for travel. It was lots of such stimulation of like color, food, language, relatives from far-flung places I'd never known. But at the same time, we just seemed to ignore the fact that there were a lot of very hungry people literally every time
Hmm.
we went to the market or took a taxi. And I think that there was just this like raging urge in me to kind of do something. And then that just evolved over the years. And so there was a travel, and I think it was the wanting to get that stimulation. And I really did kind of run off that meeting new cultures, meeting new people every day. And it kind of, some would say, snowballed in my adult career. But yeah, I've been very lucky. So I think that's where it started. And as I said, I wanted to be a journalist. I think I had a very sensible father who was a bit like, there aren't that many journalists who, I don't know, live well. I think it was an Indian
Yeah.
father, and I think he was very like, how are you going to make money doing that? And I hate to
Yeah.
say it, because I'd met Kate Adie. She came to our school. I don't know if you remember Kate Adie. She was
No,
a
no, who's that?
BBC News correspondent, and I always wanted to be
Okay.
Lakshmi
Yeah.
Jain, you know, BBC
Yeah,
News
yeah, yeah.
correspondent. And I was like, you're the coolest. But it became
I can see
very
it.
clear. Oh, thanks. You know, maybe a second career. But
Yeah.
I realised that it wasn't that easy, and that not all journalists ended up on that path. And medicine was a little more solid. I had two brothers
Mm.
at medical school who were having the best time. So again, not the most gallant reason to be a doctor, but it did look like you had a great social life and that it was a really interesting path to take. So I did end up at medical school. Yeah.
There you go. It is amazing that a lot of people, as you say, you see the inequity in the world, you see the suffering that a lot of people go through, and some people see it and recognize it, but they don't have that drive, or maybe they don't see it within themselves to have the ability to change anything. Whereas some people like yourself, it's almost like it's like an internal thing. It's like a voice that you can't switch off. It's amazing just the psychology of what drives people to different careers. I find sometimes it's really interesting, but I guess the thing that's even more interesting is that switch to MSF. You know, you went through your doctoral training, became a medical doctor, and then MSF was it had a calling for you. Did you go straight there? How did you find MSF?
So just to say, I hope I don't sound like I have a huge ego, because that's not how I see myself in terms of I must go save the world. But I'd always had MSF in the back of my mind, they visited our school, as well as Kate Adie. We had quite a lot of cool visitors. And I remember thinking they sounded amazing. I looked at the criteria and it was all, you had to be quite a well-qualified doctor. So I was like, right, crack on. Went to medical school. 6 years later, popped out the other side. Still wasn't qualified enough for MSF.
Wow.
And actually quite a lot was going on in my personal life, which meant I couldn't really leave for the kind of time periods that they wanted. I was also in training. And so I decided to do much shorter stints. I took a gap year after F2, which is quite a common path that a lot of doctors take now. They call it F3. Yeah. And I plodded to a few countries. Some were very similar to the UK. I spent a long time in Australia and then did some expedition medicine in Borneo.
Wow.
And did some work in Nepal. And it was really, really interesting.
That's cool.
I think the bottom line was it taught me that I definitely wasn't qualified enough. And there were certain situations where I just thought, I just need to know more medicine. I need to feel much more confident when a patient comes to me, has an issue, and say, yeah, I've seen that before, or yeah, I know how best to do that, because there was this kind of underlying feeling. Malawi was where I did this course in tropical medicine, and there were lots of patients. I was like, I've never seen this before. And I think that now really rings true with me. I think it's all great wanting to travel, wanting to help, wanting to do stuff, but you really need to be useful. And I say that to a lot of colleagues who are earlier on in their journey, that actually you need to know your art or your career path very well, and know actually when that comes into my consulting room, I know how to deal with it. So I joined a registrar program and in sexual health and HIV. I started off in infectious diseases and took a little turn to sexual health and HIV. Lots of reasons. I love that area. And the HIV bit was really interesting because they get, they used to. Now people living with HIV live very long and happy lives.
Yeah.
But not everywhere in the world, unfortunately. And so a lot of the infections that they get when immunity is low was something I was super interested in. And a project with MSF came up just towards the end of my training in Kenya, working in a kind of HIV specific hospital. And I got through all of the rigorous, which is it's rightly so rigorous,
Yeah, yeah.
recruitment for MSF. And yeah, found myself in Kenya on my first mission, they call it. So yeah, I was
Wow.
there.
So you're on your first mission. Was it what you expected?
So yes and no. It was. I think it was probably one of the most intense periods of my life. It was a real time to learn
Wow. Yeah.
humility. There were times I wasn't the best version of myself, if I'm honest, and thought I knew a bit more than I did. I just
Yeah.
passed some like postgraduate exams in HIV. I was very near the end of training, and I think I just thought I knew more than I did. But culturally it was completely different. I came from a different world and I probably made all those mistakes that I think a lot of MSFers or people working overseas would say they did. But at the same time, I also learned a ton, gained a load of skills, met some of the most incredible people, and yeah, saw cases and real life examples of things I'd learned in the textbooks in the hospital. So I'm a HIV and tuberculosis specialist essentially now, and it was quite interesting. There was an entire ward dedicated to patients with TB, which was one of the saddest places I've ever been. In that it was kind of avoided by a lot of people, a lot of the medical staff, because there's a lot of worry, rightly so, about tuberculosis
It's very
being
contagious. Yeah.
transmissible. And so it was a place that I actually kind of really enjoyed working because I learned a lot about TB, a lot about the importance of getting people on treatment because then they can't pass it on, and a lot of the kind of, again, maybe I knew it then, lots of public health messaging and messaging with the teams about if we get them on treatment, we don't need to worry quite so much about this contagion type response to stuff. Yeah, Kenya was amazing. I mentioned before when we last spoke about arriving at a kind of quite contentious time. It was the elections. I remember them wanting to get me in quite quickly before all that happened. And there were long-term strikes, which are well documented in the news now, of the nurses and doctors going on strike in Western Kenya. So I essentially got to a hospital with very limited resources,
Oh my God.
and amazing MSF staff who had just stayed at work. And we saw lots of things. One specific memory is as a patient coming in with a gunshot wound. I am very much a medical doctor, not a surgical doctor, and not feeling prepared for that at all. But I know how to work in an accident and emergency, and so we maintained that patient. We put a drain in and did all the things that are necessary. But it was intense. And so when you say, was it everything I expected? Yeah, I had lots of briefings beforehand. Nothing really prepared me adequately for what it was going to be like. But it was like this kind of learning curve of kind of cases, but also I think personally learning how to be more resilient, to live and work somewhere you don't know anyone very well, but the team became quite close.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was, I have very happy memories now of Kenya.
It sounds like a trial, like a literal trial by fire in some ways, like, and
People said
I
that,
love
yeah.
that sort of like, you probably, a lot of people come out of university feeling like I'm invincible. I got my thingy, I've got all my training, and even if it's post-grad stuff. But
Yeah.
I think
Doesn't
one
mean
message for
anything.
a lot of people out there is like, you get those sort of seasoned doctors, I'm sure, saw you waltzing in and being like, oh, it's, she has no idea what she's in for. It's the same, the real world is so different to, it doesn't matter how much you train and learn in university or even in like, postgrad stuff. The real world is a different, you got to relearn everything as you found out. It's crazy. I'd love to just get a brief snapshot, because it wasn't just Kenya. You mentioned Malawi. I would love it if you could just give me a brief snapshot of all the places that you'd worked while you were with MSF.
Wow. Okay. So we started in Kenya. That was a 6-month mission extended to 9. And then I came back, finished my training, and quite soon after finishing, I went to India. COVID happened. So I stayed in
Mhm.
India for an awfully long time. And then I got a job as that was for want and not because of the lockdowns and things. But again, an amazing time, culturally really, really close to my heart, a place where I could learn about being Indian again, as a British Indian. And it was really super interesting, an advanced HIV project there. Then I will do this really quickly because it is so I got a role, as I mentioned before, as a program implementer for TB HIV. And that is
Mm.
it was the dream job. I couldn't actually believe I'd got it. And that involved traveling. I think we started in Central African Republic. After that, went to South Sudan and ended up there. I'll talk about that probably a bit later because that was another steep learning curve and quite an interesting place. That's an understatement of the century, but I ended up there for nearly 5 months. And
Wow.
then, so for different varied times, Nigeria, Ethiopia, the Democratic Republic of Congo was the most recent. Myanmar, again, another
Yeah.
super interesting location. I'm probably missing, Sierra Leone, which again, I think
Oh
puts
my
a big
God.
smile on my face because the people there were amazing and we were implementing something super exciting in that MSF had a big effort. I'm very, very small, tiny pin in this whole research kind of world, but they had looked at reducing the time and the way we treat drug resistant tuberculosis because historically it had been with injectable drugs and for over
Hmm.
2 years nearly, and now it's 6 months with oral medication, which I think it sings itself, doesn't
Yeah.
it? It's
Yeah.
kind
Yeah.
of revolutionary. So Sierra Leone was one of the first countries to adopt it from the national, because the World Health Organization adopted this. So MSF worked with lots of other partners to show that this was okay and this was a good treatment. And Sierra Leone was somewhere that needed support with the training and how to roll it out. And I was there when we kind of officially started the first patient on this. And also Sierra Leone is just beautiful, beautiful people, and lots of love for that place. So, yeah.
It's, I mean, places I say, like DRC, Congo, CAR, Sierra Leone, Kenya, like all these places, Myanmar, Malawi, they're places that a lot of people don't get to see. And you've got you've had the experience of seeing the beauty in these places as well as the sort of
Mm.
difficult aspects as well, which I think is, I personally think people, if they have the opportunity, should travel to as many places and meet as many people as they can, because there's just no better way of giving you just that perspective of the world. So it's amazing to sort of to get that access to places. But what I would love is, if you don't mind indulging me a little bit, is just to play a very quick fire game. And it's really simple, and it's basically sort of like normal hospital, field hospital, and I'm going to give you one sort of medical term, and it's your job to very quickly to describe, what it might be in a normal hospital and what it might be in a field hospital. And if this doesn't go well, we'll just edit it out. But
No, it
I
sounds
have
fun.
confidence.
Let's
I think
go.
it's going to be good. Um, so first one, ward rounds. What's that like in a
Oh,
normal hospital versus a field round, field hospital?
I, so they're quite similar. I think the interest of the patient, like the pathology, the disease that you've got in front of you, it is more interesting because I love infectious diseases. It makes me sound
Mm.
like a complete weirdo, but I do love infections, and so you see them a bit more real. But ward rounds in both places are very rewarding. I think they're probably a little more structured here in the UK in the
Yeah,
NHS, and I
I
was never
imagine.
quite at the top of the food chain in the UK, which I never minded. But whereas it is a slightly different, I'm hopefully going as a mentor in MSF settings. And okay, so I did think I wanted to mention this because I think that is the best aspect of my role, in that as an implementer you get to spend a prolonged period of time in these places doing ward rounds, but with people who don't always have people guiding them. And so you're very much not telling them what to do, but it's having that kind of back and forth about what you think might be the disease that is the most
Okay.
satisfying thing. And it's training, it's learning on the job.
Yeah.
And that was great. South Sudan, so many happy memories. And I'm still supporting some of the doctors who are getting great jobs and moving, and should be, because they were excellent. They just haven't quite had the access to mentorship or training in the same way that I do, having
Yeah.
trained in the UK.
Nice. Okay, that's good. Round two. Running out of supplies. What's it
Oh.
like in a normal hospital versus a field hospital?
So, gosh, we have no idea how privileged that has never happened to me in the NHS, whereas it's happened many times in a lot of our field hospitals through many parts of the chain falling down. And it's tricky when you've got a kid or a very sick patient in front of you who needs something. And that's where I started to want to stamp my feet a bit more and get a bit more vocal about stuff because that sometimes starts at things like often starts at ministries of health who haven't really got the supply chain sorted, and you're a bit like, or, sometimes, and again, it was unfair, but you want someone to blame when you're feeling quite so frustrated. You'd be like, why does pharmacy not realize that this actually ends with this person at the end of that needle or
Yeah,
whatever?
yeah,
So yeah, much harder
I can
in the
imagine.
field and much more common.
All right, next one. Downtime. The things you do when you're not treating patients and doing stuff. What's the difference between normal hospital and in the field?
Oh, wow. So MSF has taught me to, and COVID, as I'm sure many will say, has taught me to use my time and not need quite so much external entertainment as possible. So MSF often used to be quite a good little life detox in terms of life starts at 6:37. This is a person I don't recognise anymore, but I used to get up at 5, work out.
Oh
They
my
have these
God.
rooms called the bunker rooms, which are for if bad things happen, if people start shooting, you need to go and
Wow.
lock down somewhere. They're also air
Yeah.
conditioned and have internet. So they're great for
They're
getting a
great. Yeah.
workout on your phone.
Yeah.
And so where I would be at about 5:30 a.m. on in the mornings, I do a workout and then go and start your day. So I actually think life in mission, because it is so lights out at about 8, as soon as it gets dark, things are a lot less interesting. Your downtime is very different to kind of normal hospital here, where the world you can go, and did most of my training in London, so yeah, you can imagine my downtime was very different.
I can imagine. Yeah. I just imagine it being, you're, well, I don't know whether would you say you work more in a mission? Or is what would I
Absolutely.
say? Yeah. I can
So I
imagine
come
it's like,
back,
yeah.
yeah, and just sleep for days and days, because you're waking up at 5:30, you're going to bed at 8, but you're pretty much working up to that till you have dinner. And
Yeah.
as an implementer, it's quite exciting. I like to get stuff done. I've edited that. I use a rude word normally. Get it done though.
Yeah.
And you just, because you've got 6 weeks to 8 weeks to just get stuff sorted, you don't stop, because there is that.
Nice.
I need to get it all done.
And I guess the final one is there anything that I've missed that is sort of like a really obvious comparison to, like, just to give people, like, it is a completely black and white world.
Oh, I think accommodation. That was the. I was thinking about this, and I've lived in some really interesting places, but not just the country, the actual physical. Are you in a mud hut? Are you in a tent? Compared to hospital accommodation, which is just very hot, is my
Yeah.
overwhelming memory. And usually just like a converted TB sanatorium or something like that. I
Oh
remember
my
in my
God.
first
Wow.
jobs, I lived in the hospital. So yeah, where you live is pretty different. I think other than that, medicine is medicine. It's just
Awesome.
I do
Just
find
different
it more
environment.
interesting in these settings.
Yeah. It does. It
Yeah.
does sound a lot more exotic for sure. But thank you so much for indulging me on that. That was good fun.
Mhm.
Um, So on this show, we always love guests to come on and bring us a significant story from their career, something that we can really go in depth with, and sort of, with a bit of drama and a bit of excitement, and sometimes it gets emotional. But I mean, we talked about yours a little bit. I mean, you mentioned South Sudan, but
Hmm.
I wonder whether you can sort of start from the beginning and sort of paint us a picture of what your story is like in South Sudan.
South Sudan, I think it's important to kind of get you in the setting a bit more, in that South Sudan became independent from Sudan. I remember it being stamped on my visa. It's one of the young, it might not still be, but it was the youngest country in the world at the time I got my visa, which I think was about 2020. And it really is a country that is very much finding its feet. There's a lot of internal conflict, a lot of armed groups within the country. So I was there originally for 3 months, but I couldn't leave for a while, and I'll explain why. But essentially, with that aside, there's a lot of natural disasters that hit there as well. And when I arrived, this place called Leo in Unity State was somewhere MSF had been working for a long, long time. But the setting of the hospital has changed it's had multiple different faces because of things like the entire hospital being burnt down. So when I got there, it was an entire tented hospital, which in itself is quite interesting and makes for somewhere that is quite challenging to work. And it was very clear that it was very difficult to do things like keep normal infection control and keep cool, keep patients, in the right kind of circumstances. So that's where I got, and I arrived, and I remember they had to erect my tent for me because it was quite limited people that were coming, and I was very, very lucky to get there because you can only get in on WFP, the World Food Programme.
Yeah.
Used to fly people in on those planes, and they could only land if the conditions are okay. So we had got lucky, we landed, and then they were like, yep, we need to set you up. And I've got some great photos of how this tent slowly erected, and this was going to be my home. And there were limited people in the camp for obvious reasons. The reason I was there was because a lot of patients had moved out of Layer because of a lot of the instability with HIV up into Bentu State, which is where there is a bigger hospital, more access to services.
Yeah.
It's a good 2-day walk to get there.
Oh, wow.
And slowly, as things had settled in Layer, they were coming back. So there had been an increased pressure on services, and a lot of patients with HIV who needed to be continued on medications or started and treated. And so I was there to support the local staff with how to manage this. And so I was meant to be there for about 2 months to try and help with this getting off the ground. And about a week in, and again, I wasn't, you go there with HIV TB on the radar, but you're very much a medical doctor and you kind of muck in with everything. And I saw that there was a massive need for a lot of support. And there are a few cases that really stick out in my mind, and that there were a lot of snake bites from children who were just playing and they got bitten. And again, something that I didn't have much experience in, but had really horrible consequences. Lots of patients in there, lots of children with TB, and how to isolate them in the tents with these overrun services. And that was something I was going to help them with. And there was a real need for a lot of training and setting up a laboratory to test for HIV and other things. So I was there for that, been there a week, and the rain started. And I was like, okay, it's a bit of rain. I've never seen rain like this. So again, I jogged my memory with some photos. And one morning I woke up and my backpack, which was on the floor, was just floating around in brown, dirty water. And I remember this guy being like, you'll need some Wellingtons. And I had got some Wellingtons, but they were floating around somewhere in the water too. Yeah. Thankfully, my bed was on kind of an erected kind of poles. And so I wasn't in the water. But yeah, that wasn't very much fun.
Oh my God.
I got out of my tent and was kind of seeing everyone else. And we were all a little bit like, what are we going to do? And I think the problem was there is no really good drainage for this water to go. Yeah. So we went outside the camp and the entire place was just underwater.
It's like a lake.
Yeah, the photos I've got, it is insane, and you're kind of just wading. And then a few people started to talk about what that meant in terms of what we were wading in. So the snake bites I talked about, it did cross my mind. There were probably snakes in here. Our toilet was a very nice toilet, but it was a latrine. And that's how most of the toilets were for most families and people living there. So that was something that was overflowing into the toilet. Yeah. And so I talked about infection and prevention control. My brain just couldn't really. I laugh not because I think it's funny, because you don't know what else to do, because it was absolutely like the worst situation, and you were just, and it was also still about 40 degrees in heat.
Oh wow!
And we had a full ward of patients. So
this is like, again, this is like not really a town or a city. This is like very rural kind of environment with a tent. A sort of hospital tent and a few other sort of satellite tents around it. and then now it's essentially just a flooded tent place without any electricity. Do you have any electricity?
So we did, but then we didn't after the flood. So
Oh
I have
yeah, I
to
didn't think so.
say, hats off to logistics because I wouldn't have coped. I'm all right as a doctor. It's useless as any kind of logistician. And they managed to make things comfortable. They did pump a large amount of the water away, but then it just
Yeah.
kept raining. So we had these
Oh
kind of
man.
temporary lamps, but it wasn't lit everywhere. And we had a lamp for our consultations. But yeah, electricity was, quite dangerous with all this water
Yeah.
floating around. And I remember thinking, so that what you described the hospital quite well, and then there was this proper body of water and like a bridge that was between us, and there was some housing where we were, but then there was a big settlement of kind of people on the move in temporary housing, and you could see those homes were just completely, some of them had just been washed away and
Oh
we couldn't get
jeez.
to them. So in essence, they couldn't get to us either. And so there were these makeshift boats, kids running around, and it was literally coming up to their shoulders. They're quite brave. Yeah, I'm not the tallest
What?
person in the world and was quite frightened, but you did have to just move around a little to get stuff
Wait,
done and to see
the water
patients.
was like
Because
shoulder
I'm what,
height.
5 foot two. Yeah, so the kids and me, people were joking because there was some very tall South Sudanese who were much taller than me, but I'm quite small. The water was coming up to your kind of armpits, I would
Up.
say.
Oh my
And so,
God.
and you just didn't know what was kind of creeping around between you.
Yeah, because
So,
it's brown water. Oh my God, how did you get? I mean, again, like I'm speechless. What on earth do you do? How did you manage that?
so we had areas of the camp that did better than others, and the water did go after the rain did stop, but it was every time it started again, you'd be a bit anxious. And logs teams worked very well on draining, and the whole community were kind of trying to drain this water. So it happened, but also there were concerns about food coming in because all the food came in on the planes and they can't
Yeah,
land in this. So we started to use the rations and things like that. It wasn't for too long, thankfully. It was probably about a week that we were on and off like this. The key thing I remember was there was a boy who had a snake bite who had reached the kind of height of what we could do in terms of giving antibiotics and helping with this nasty wound that had kind of got worse and worse with us. And the plan was always to these complex cases, you would send over to Bentu Hospital because they had much more capacity. They had a surgeon there, and I would love a surgeon, and the whole team, we kind of agreed that would be the best thing for him. But as time went on, it was really bad timing for him because we just couldn't land the plane to get him out. And we got him out on day 7 and he did
right.
okay, I'm happy to say,
Okay.
but it was pretty
Yeah,
touch and go every day because I just had to say to him, we're just going to carry on the antibiotics. And thankfully there was a window, an opportunity where we could get him out. But it caused quite a lot of lost sleep on my side and a lot of the team. And it really did distract from what I'd gone there to do, which was
yeah,
actually quite a straightforward task. But at the same time, again, learned lots. And so I think my 2 take-home messages are you always need to know more, so know your craft, and also just admit when you don't know it, but thankfully there are many other people to save your skin when you do.
yeah. Wow. Again, like there's being a doctor in the Western world, and that's hard
Yeah.
enough in some cases. Then there's being a doctor in a place where, as I said, like South Sudan, which hasn't got much
Mm.
resources, and then there's being a doctor in South Sudan, and you have an apocalyptic flood
Yeah,
that washes everything away, and keeping things sterile, like
it's
all that kind of
impossible.
stuff.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I can't even
Sadly, it's not
imagine.
that rare in South Sudan because now I
Yeah.
keep a close eye on what's happening, and the floods happen every year.
Did you did you lose patience during that time, or when you were there?
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
it's hard to say. It's not just the obvious flood water. It's things like access to the right medicines. It's them
Yeah.
getting to you at the right time. The journey to the hospital from the peripheries is quite. There was an area called Pieri that I kept wanting to visit because apparently there was a huge cohort of patients with tuberculosis and HIV, and drugs weren't getting to them, and there was a real need to kind of train on new medication regimens for them and things. But I could never get there because of the security risk or the flooding. And you realise that these patients were coming from so far that actually sometimes by the time they got to you, there wasn't a lot to do. I think that's one of the other things I've learned in MSF, sadly, that there is sometimes just nothing you can do. And that was one of those initial things that, of course, I can help, of course, but actually sometimes you just have to accept that there is a ceiling to what you can access, and it's very different to the ceiling of care in the NHS. Actually, that's a much sadder comparison, but would have fit earlier. Yeah.
Oh man, that must be so frustrating.
It is. I think as I've got older, I'm much more comfortable with that as just the way things are. That's not giving up. This is what I mean. You can advocate at a completely different level and hopefully impact that. But at that moment in time, you also having your own frustrations and your own, it doesn't help the team. It doesn't really help with morale. And you have to be very pragmatic and just say, this is what we can do. And I actually think that's one of the best lessons I've learned, and something I often see in other colleagues, and hopefully can share that I've been down that road, and actually shouting about stuff isn't always the obvious way to get stuff done. Kind of subtly trying to just take on board all these things and then go back to wherever you can and share and just say we really need to focus on this stuff is far more important.
Fascinating. And given all the amazing places that you've worked and all the things you've done, I mean, what would you say is the proudest achievement or the proudest moment that you've had in all that time?
Oh gosh, that is a proper on-the-spot question. India was a real journey for me because obviously my heritage is from India, but I've been born and bred in the UK, and I've never really known which place I'm really from. And I think in truth, I'm from neither in another way, in that I kind of am a bit of both. And being placed in India in this advanced HIV hospital was such a hard but also valuable time. And it makes me think of some of the patients that, so just to step back a little bit. So in India, some of the best doctors I've ever met, really good training schemes, and they're very similar. But Bihar, this state where I was working in this town called Patna, had a recognised issue with patients with something called visceral leishmaniasis, a skin and internal disease caused by an insect that causes these organs to fail, essentially. Wow. And we found a lot of patients had HIV at the same time. And these patients were not getting on treatment. So these patients were coming to the hospital at a state and a point that they were not likely to live for very long, but needed supportive care. The things they would tell us about how they were treated was shocking. And so the stigma associated with having HIV, even to the point that fellow medical professionals would leave the HIV patients to the end of the list so that they didn't infect the other patients and things. And this is respectfully said, because I know this is not how a lot of doctors in India think, but these were valid experiences from these patients that we heard, and how even the families would make them sit and eat separately. They'd have separate utensils. They'd been given separate, I'd say a room is a bit of a elaborate term for it. I think they'd just been given a space that was away from the rest of the community. The stigma was unreal. And so I think, this is a long way of telling you the answer to my proudest moment, but being on ward rounds with fellow doctors who also had kind of, you absorb what's around you. Some of the concerns about HIV patients I could see had translated into some of their beliefs. Really working with those teams about how undetectable equals untransmissible. If we get these patients on treatment, they can pass it to no one. And really kind of getting that as the mantra. There was a really amazing kind of mental health team that we worked with there too, who I became very good friends with. And actually we kind of were like, let's just share this message. And on a personal note, I used to do it in the worst Punjabi Hindi hybrid language that I'd remembered from being a child with my parents.
Yeah.
So I could almost communicate with patients on a certain level, not on a brilliant level, but I could. I think sitting on beds with them, hugging them, talking to them, showing them that they were of value, especially young women, was really important and one of the proudest times ever. And I'm feeling emotional about it now because they just haven't been given the chance. And they looked like me. They spoke
Yeah.
like me at times, but they'd just been born in the wrong place. And I think helping change a little tiny bit of the belief process and having them think something that they were worth something was really special. So I was really happy to
That's
go to
beautiful.
India. Yeah.
That's really beautiful. Yeah. This is kind of off the back of that a little bit, and it just made me think of it while you're saying it there. Like, I had a previous interview on the podcast with a first responder, a firefighter. She was a paramedic and a firefighter. And I think she, in some ways, what was fascinating about her, and I think it applies to your experiences as well, is that you see people at their absolute worst moments, but then you also see the best in humanity throughout those things. And it's such a weird, you're seeing both polar opposites of life at the same time. And I guess through your experiences and what you've learned now and reflecting on and back on everything, like, is there anything you've learned about maybe yourself or maybe even just about humanity and what we all share as an experience, or you as a doctor? What kind of comes to mind when you think about what you've learned about, I guess, us as a species and what we're capable of?
Wow. So I listened to the firefighter episode. She was
Oh, you
cool.
did. She was cool,
Yeah.
yeah.
She was cool. And I think you're right. I've never really thought of it like that, but I do see people at their worst. I think India was a time where people came in and you were jumping on their chests and literally trying to resuscitate them.
Oh, wow.
And sometimes it was rare, I'm not going to lie, there was a lot of death as well, but sometimes they walked out. And I think, I don't want to sound really cliched, but it gave me hope. It made me think that the human species inherently wants to be good. It wants to help each other. We're at a really, I don't know, I'm living in the UK at the moment. It keeps occurring to me that society's getting a little bit divided, looking certain ways, being certain colours, being from different backgrounds. But I think every place I've been, people want exactly the same things. They just want their family to be okay. That's been quite a journey for me, in that I didn't really understand the importance of family. Don't get me wrong, I love my parents. I'm very lucky. I love my brothers, but I didn't feel quite how I feel leaving my little girl now. And I think it's given me a different way of looking at humans and helped me understand some of the mothers sat in the beds who are with their babies and what they might be going through, differently to a younger doctor who was just a bit like, yeah, see you, mum, I'm just going to go on another trip. And she didn't really have much say in the matter. Obviously she cared, but I think essentially people do, it's not complex what they want out of a situation, and they want to be well, they want their family to be well, and essentially and it doesn't really come down to what colour you are or where you're from. That need is essentially the same. And I think we should remember that when we're also people are trying to divide us. I recognise that I'm very lucky to have had those insights. And sometimes I want to say to people, even in the local GP who are like, I want to be seen now, that kind of thing. You're just like, oh, take a deep breath. You don't want to patronise, but things could be a lot worse, right? I'm super impressed with how we live here. It's not perfect, but you realise things can change. That's not,
Yeah.
so a lot of these settings, I would happily go and move to somewhere like Kenya. And that's on the radar for me and my husband because that's his home. But essentially, and I don't think by any means like the quality of care in a lot of these places is different. It's these conflicts that are happening. It's these natural disasters that just mean that your ability to access stuff is zero. And and then often I'm like, we just don't know how lucky we are. Pinch yourself every day, because I do feel quite lucky at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just getting towards the end here, I mean, for any advice for people listening, whether they're, 16, 17-year-old aspiring doctors, or if they're like, even in part of their career and want to get into, because I know MSF does, obviously a lot of doctors work for MSF, but there's a lot of other people as well. I mean,
Yeah,
kind of just
definitely.
generally, what advice do you have for people that, let's start with the doctors, for people that want to follow in your particular footsteps and do what you did?
So I didn't really allude to a lot of my training, and actually, it was probably the biggest chunk of my career, so I should give it the credit it's due. I was very lucky to have a lot of supported mentors who did allow a lot of the travel overseas during my training. And what I'd say is, I don't think I met anyone who actually really understood where I was going, maybe because I didn't really know either. And I seem to have landed in a role that I'm very happy in, but that was not like something I knew when I was 18. I just knew the kind of area. And if you say to someone, I want to go and do humanitarian work, I think in medicine, they might just laugh at you because it's not, that's just not a way to put food on the table. It's not a very sustainable
Yeah.
way to live
Yeah.
and work, but it is possible. And so I'd like to give them a bit of hope in that you do need to demonstrate that you are willing to travel to these countries for long periods of time and kind of put the groundwork in. The stuff that I learned in my very few first missions was invaluable to kind of contributing to the work that I did. Mine is not a classic career path, and not everyone will end up with a role with MSF, but there are lots of NGOs out there who have valuable places for experience, but that you do need the experience to back it up. And that means having a long career in the NHS. So I didn't leave the NHS till I'd worked for 15 years. You
Wow.
need that backing of trying
Yeah.
to kind of being able to carry that over into being of value to a lot of these things. And then don't listen to everyone, because I sat at a lot of, we have an annual appraisal process, and I could see in people's faces, and some of the older doctors did say to me, "You've got no idea where you're going, do you, Lakshmi?" And kind of was a bit like, I kind of do, but it's just not the same path. It's not that traditional path, and there are lots of things you can do to get an idea if this kind of work is for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a
Mm.
very important message. It's interesting. It's kind of like almost like telling yourself when you're going into Kenya for the first time, like, you think you know everything, and going to that, it's a whole new world. Yeah. Um, Brill. Well, listen. I always like at the end just to offer guests the opportunity to, tell people where to find you or what you're up to. Some people have obviously got books or, social media stuff. I don't know whether you want to sort of shout out MSF. What would you like to share with people?
So you mentioned a bit about MSF and the other roles. I think I'd really like to highlight a bit about the if you are of different backgrounds. So I work in the Manson unit, which is a exciting department within MSF UK that has lots of different social scientists, epidemiologists, doctors, nurses that all contribute to work that directly kind of supports people and our projects. And so I wouldn't just think, oh, I'm a doctor. Doctors Without Borders is something I could look at. There are midwives, nurses. There is anthropologists. I think some of the
Logistics teams
coolest
you
roles,
mentioned.
logistics teams, human rights, affairs officers, and
Lawyers,
there are
probably.
lawyers. Yeah, and some of the
Yeah.
things that I kind of think I didn't even know that existed. I think it would have been quite an interesting career had I done it. And all the communication stuff, people with really
Yeah.
exciting journalism careers that I've now met being on the other side. So yeah, have a look. There's a lot of great stuff. It's a wonderful organisation to work for. I'm not huge on socials, but I'm on LinkedIn, and I'd be very happy to talk to anyone who wants to connect on that, because it is a really, like, working in this field is super interesting. And yeah, I hope people have enjoyed listening to some of my ramblings.
Yeah. It's super inspirational, and if there was more people like you, I think the world would be a better place. So I think
It's
that's
kind. Thanks.
Lakshmi. Listen, thank you so much for taking the time to share your stories with us.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been great. And thanks for asking me, Chris.
And that's a wrap on the first episode of 2026. A huge thank you to Lakshmi for sharing her story, and of course a huge thanks to you guys for listening and watching as well. If you'd like to find out more about Lakshmi's work or what MSF have been up to, you can check out the links in the show notes, or you can check out our website, noordinarymonday.com. And as always, you can find extra clips and visuals from this episode all across our socials. We're on Instagram, LinkedIn, and of course the No Ordinary Monday podcast community on Facebook, where you can join the conversation, ask questions, find guests, and share your own thoughts about the show. Alright, so in next week's episode, bush pilot Matt Dearden joins me to recount the moment that he was certain he was going to die. He was alone in the cockpit, basically passing out over a remote area of Papua New Guinea. It is a white-knuckle story of survival about split-second decisions and a part of commercial aviation that few of us ever get to see. Make sure you're subscribed or following the show so you don't miss out on these episodes and more. If you enjoyed today's episode, there are 4 ways that you can show us some love. Number 1, you can simply click 5 stars on this episode or the show on whatever podcatcher you're listening on. Number 2, you can leave us a nice review somewhere. Number 3, you can tell a family member or friend. And number 4, support us on buymeacoffee.com/noordinarymonday. Even if you just do one of these things, it really helps us keep the lights on, avoids adverts, and allows us to keep bringing you amazing guests and stories week after week. And that's it for this week. This show is independently produced, hosted, and edited by me, Chris Barron. Thank you so much for listening. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you next Monday.